think I'll just go sit down and listen to somebody else talk. Rockstar. Anyway, thank you very much for the kind words about me and about Caledon. I see a lot of old, I see a lot of old faces in the crowd. Old in both senses of the word. We're all getting on, and some young ones, which is even better. Just before I start, this session is on poverty and inequality, and I'm very happy to see Ed Broadbent here. Thanks for coming, Ed. And his new institute, the Broadbent Institute, has just released this week a major report on inequality. So I commend that to you. Another study from the Center for the Study of Living Standards, written by our colleague Andrew Sharp and his associate Evan Kapeluk, has arrived just in time for Caledon's 20th anniversary event. It adds valuable evidence on the redistributive role of the Canadian state, which is the topic of my talk today. Contrary to what a lot of people believe, government, by means of income taxes and transfers, significantly reduces market income inequality. At last count, in 2010, taxes and transfers reduced market inequality by close to 1/4, most of it as a result of income security programs, and less due to income taxes. Looking over the long term, from 1981 to 2010, government has made a difference, offsetting rising market income inequality by 44%. These are from the new study. But Canada could do a lot better. In 1994, at their peak, taxes and transfers reduced market income inequality by 28.7%, but that has fallen to 23.7% in 2010. The redistributive power of Canadian governments has overall weakened since the mid-90s, due in large part to cuts to two of Canada's most important social programs, employment insurance and welfare. Canada is below the OECD average and ranks 23rd out of 34 countries in terms of after-tax inequality. Sharp and Kapeluk come away from their slew of statistics and conclude, bluntly and correctly, that, and I quote, Canada thus has much room to increase its redistributive effort. What is needed is political will. Well, we at Caledon have worked hard over the last 20 years to invent and improve income security programs and to encourage the political will necessary for reform. At the same time, we know that income programs alone cannot vanquish poverty and inequality, which are complex, diverse, and tough issues that require a range of interventions involving both income programs and social services by a number of actors. All three orders of government, employers, unions, educational and health institutions, voluntary organizations, and communities. But we firmly believe that the federal government has the lead role in tackling poverty and inequality in Canada through the tax transfer system, and it should be doing more, a lot more. Today, I'll discuss a number of proposals that Caledon has made to strengthen Ottawa's income security system. Now, my talk today casts a broad net across 6 key federal income security programs in the areas of child benefits, adult benefits, and seniors benefits. My colleague Sherry Torjman will discuss reform of disability income programs in her talk following. I end with a brief look at a program that doesn't exist. My discussion of these programs, of course, must be quite fleeting given the limited time and the broad scope that I'm dealing with. Most of what I have to say involves what we term the architecture of social policy, meaning broad structures and functions of social programs. But reform can be accelerated and implemented by incremental changes, typically improvements in benefit rates. In Caledon's world, incrementalism is not a dirty word. Several principles inform and guide our critiques and proposals over the years. These are progressive versus regressive, targeted and broad-based, fair and unfair, simple and complex, and transparent and stealthy. These terms will crop up throughout my talk. So I'll start with child benefits. And here I am going to do a little bit of going back in time just so to help us look at the future of child benefits. 1993 was a breakthrough year in Canadian social policy. It launched a large structural reform of federal child benefits that replaced family allowances and the refundable and non-refundable child tax credits, replacing them with a single geared-to-income child tax benefit. Finally, Ottawa had a sound architecture of child benefits to better fight poverty and inequality. The new child tax benefit replaced 3 programs that differed in purpose, design, and distributional impact. Family allowances were mildly progressive and they were universal, though with an income test in its last few years. The refundable credit was very progressive and targeted to poor families. The non-refundable child tax credit, which replaced the children's tax exemption during the income tax reforms of 1988, was a quasi-universal demo grant that delivered the same federal and provincial territorial income tax savings to all non-poor families, except the poor, of course, who got nothing. This mismatched troika of child benefits was inequitable, complicated, and virtually incomprehensible to most parents and probably most politicians too. The combined distribution of benefits bore no logical or defensible relationship to need as measured by level of family income. Families with the same income received different amounts of child benefit depending upon each parent's share of family income. The core aims of child benefits, reducing poverty and helping parents with their child rearing costs, were in constant tension. By contrast, the new child tax benefit offered several advantages. It was a non-stigmatizing, inclusive program that delivered its benefits to the large majority of Canadian families through the same vehicle. It was portable, providing a stable and assured supplements to income no matter where families live or move. It was progressive, meaning benefits declined as incomes increased. It paid the same amount to all families with the same income, regardless of the sources of that income, where they live, or their family type. But Ottawa was not the only game in town when it comes to child benefits. The provinces and territories also delivered child benefits targeted to families on welfare. This resulted in the inequitable situation where families on welfare received twice as much child benefits as the working poor. Welfare-embedded child benefits form part of what Caledon's resident wordsmith, Sherry Torgeman, dubbed the welfare wall. The term welfare wall refers to the fact that it might be more rational in financial terms for a poor family to get and stay on welfare because they got cash benefits for spouses and children and might receive a variety of other cash and in-kind benefits, including supplementary health, dental, and drug care, subsidized housing, and access to crucial supports for recipients with disabilities. But if families left welfare and worked typically for low wages, they would not only forfeit welfare income and services, but also see their typically meager incomes reduced by income and payroll taxes and work-related expenses such as clothing, transportation, and childcare. In a rare act of cooperative federalism, Ottawa and the provinces and territories got together and launched the National Child Benefit Reform in 1998. The main engine of reform was the 1998 Canada Child Tax Benefit, a restructured version of the child tax benefit. This new program was composed of 2 layers: a base benefit for both poor and non-poor families, on top of which sits the National Child Benefit Supplement, which is targeted to low-income families. As Ottawa incrementally increased payments under the National Child Benefit Supplement portion of the Canada Child Tax Benefit, the provinces and territories were free, and indeed expected, to reduce their welfare child benefits by the amount of the federal increase. The provincial and territorial governments agreed to reinvest the resulting savings in other programs and services for low-income families with kids. The goal here was to raise the federal Canada Child Tax Benefit to the point where it alone, or in concert with provincial territorial income-tested child benefits, displaced basic welfare-embedded child benefits, estimated at about $2,500 per child in 1998, or $3,300 in today's dollars. That amount would achieve the goal of an integrated child benefit. All low-income families, regardless of their major sources of income, would receive the same amount of federal child benefits, and the distinction between child benefits for the working poor and the non-working poor would be eliminated by displacing welfare child benefits. The national child benefit architecture succeeded because it made good politics and good policy, an all too rare combination. All provinces and territories signed on. Each order of government made joint structural changes to their respective child benefit systems that they could not have accomplished on their own. This was an astonishing achievement, to get two governments to work together on reforms that they couldn't have done on their own. There is empirical evidence from government, think tank, and academic researchers that the national child benefit has had positive income and behavioral effects, reducing poverty and helping to lower the welfare wall. But, and there's a but, always a but, social policy reform can be fragile and fleeting. Although both progressive conservative and liberal governments had contributed to the long evolution of child benefits over the years, the current federal government wanted to put its own stamp on the system by boosting child benefits for middle-class voters and offering families cash instead of services for childcare. While they left the Canada Child Tax Benefit pretty much alone, except for a cut in the Young Person Supplement, the federal government reached into the past and resurrected two social policy zombies: the universal child care benefit, similar to the family allowance, and the non-refundable child tax credit, the same as in the 1980s. These two retreads deliver sizable benefits to upper income families and introduce both vertical and horizontal inequities into the child benefit system. The universal child care benefit is a classic case of social policy by stealth. It is subject to federal and provincial territorial income taxes, which means that most families do not end up with a full $1,200 a year per child. Families of different types, i.e. single parents, one earner and two earner couples, but with the same income, get different amounts of after-tax benefits. Families with the same income also end up with different after-tax amounts depending upon the province or territory in which they live. Despite its title, the Universal Child Care Benefit is not tied to use of child care. Families can spend it however they wish. Even if used for this purpose, its $1,200 per year, less after taxes, buys precious little in the way of child care. The $1,200 payment in 2006 is now, by the way, worth only $1,080 in constant dollars. There's been a loss of 10% over the years. The Universal Child Care Benefit is nothing more than a poorly designed child benefit. To compound these inequities, the government subsequently decided to exempt single parents' universal child care benefits from taxation, though couples' benefits remain taxable. Go figure. Caledon's child benefit reform proposals, to finally come to what we want, is to axe the universal child care benefit and non-refundable child tax credit and use the resulting savings to boost the Canada Child Tax Benefit. The maximum payment under our proposal, payable to low-income families, would be $5,300 in today's dollars, up from the current maximum Canada Child Tax Benefit payment of $3,582 for the first child. Excuse me. Benefit increases under our proposal would be incremental, as they were when Ottawa grew the Canada Child Tax Benefit in the first years. To improve benefits for modest and middle-income families, we would increase the base child tax benefit rather than the National Child Benefit Supplement. For despite our emphasis on child benefits as a key poverty reduction instrument, their parental recognition objective must not be abandoned. So I'll now move on to adult benefits and discuss two programs, one for the working poor and one for the unemployed. First one is the Working Income Tax Benefit. Half of poor Canadians work but traditionally have received very little help from Ottawa, with the recent exception of the National Child Benefit. The current federal government made a major advance in income security policy when it created the Working Income Tax Benefit, better known as WITB, in 2007, The new program had two key aims: to reduce disincentives to work for welfare recipients who are stuck behind the welfare wall, and to enhance incentives to work among the working poor. Whitby seeks to lower the welfare wall by supplementing low earnings from employment to help make work pay, as the Brits put it. Whitby is intended to help welfare recipients make the often difficult move from welfare to work by topping up their typically lower earnings. Whitby's other major purpose is to increase incentives for people to join the workforce, keep working, and not have to resort to the tangled safety net of welfare. Whitby also provides an additional benefit for persons with disabilities. Another laudable feature is that provinces and territories can opt to vary Whitby's parameters to better fit with their own income security programs and policy priorities. While the design of Whitby makes sense, it's a classic refundable tax credit delivered through the income tax system, its original parameters made for a very modest and highly targeted program that excluded many of the working poor. The reason is that maximum benefits were only $500 a year for a single person and $1,000 a year for families. This meant that maximum payments were pushed very, very low down the income ladder. Now, Caledon enthusiastically supported Whitby, but called for better benefits that extend higher up the income ladder. Minister Flaherty listened to us, and his 2009 budget boosted Whitby's benefits and broadened its reach to help more of Canada's working poor. For single workers, the maximum benefit rose to $925, which was a hefty real increase of 77%. Indexation has brought the maximum Whitby payment this year to a maximum $970 for single recipients, but eligibility for benefits ends at $17,478. Sorry for all these numbers. But this still leaves Whitby substantially below minimum wage. The disappearing point for single recipients remains thousands of dollars below minimum wage throughout Canada. So what is our advice to the government? Keep on building Whitby through incremental improvements. The other adult benefit I wanted to mention is the one that's much in the news these days, and it's the employment insurance program. Income support for the unemployed is, along with child benefits, one of the oldest provisions of the welfare state. The federal government took over responsibilities for unemployment benefits from the provinces in 1940, spurred by the devastating Great Depression. Unemployment insurance grew to cover virtually the entire workforce by 1971. But in the decades since, the trend has been to restrict coverage and reduce benefits. There has been concern that the overly generous unemployment insurance program would create work disincentives, resulting in higher costs. Canada's unemployment insurance program, which in Orwellian fashion was renamed Employment Insurance in 1996, was tightened in the 1990s. Employees had to work longer to qualify for benefits when they lost their jobs, payments were lowered, and the maximum duration of benefits was reduced. Coverage has now shrunk to about half of the unemployed today because many more of the unemployed cannot get enough hours of work to qualify. Especially hard hit is the growing population with non-standard jobs, the self-employed who are not eligible for UI, multiple job holders, contract workers, and part-time workers, and now make up about a third of the workforce. Some of the jobless who don't get any EI benefits still pay premiums but cannot get enough hours of work. Others did not even pay into the program because they did not work in the previous year or did not have insurable earnings despite having worked. Employment insurance is a highly complex program, largely due to its regional feature, which affects both eligibility and duration of benefits. The division of Canada into 58 unemployment regions leads to inequitable treatment of the unemployed. Entrance requirements range to 420 hours for regions with unemployment rates over 13% to 700 hours for regions with unemployment rates less than 6%. The maximum duration of benefits ranges from 19 weeks to 50 weeks. These regional rules can lead to the absurd situation where two people who are working side by side for the same employer for the same number of hours are laid off, and one gets employment insurance while the other does not because they live in adjacent economic regions. Yet there is no evidence to suggest that the average rate of unemployment in a region is the determining factor for how hard it is to get a job. Other factors, such as the particular skills of the unemployed person, their education, and personality, are likely much more significant. We think that employment insurance could and should be made stronger. Caledon has proposed that the earnings replacement capacity of the program be increased from the current 55% of insurable earnings to 70%, which would raise maximum weekly benefits from $485 to $618. There should be one uniform set of rules for work requirements and length of benefits for all Canadians wherever they live and work. The amount of benefit should be calculated on the best 12 weeks of earnings of the previous 26, so as to allow flexibility to take part-time jobs. Now, these are badly needed and practicable improvements, but they would still leave many of Canada's unemployed frozen out of EI. At present, welfare is the only other resort for the unemployed who are not eligible for EI. But welfare is a highly stigmatizing, invasive, and archaic program. Caledon has therefore proposed that Ottawa develop a new income-tested program that would sit between welfare and employment insurance. The new program would provide limited and temporary financial assistance to those in need who are actively engaged in job search. Such a temporary income program would complement a strengthened employment insurance. The new program would pay temporary, time-limited, and income-tested benefits to unemployed workers with lower, modest incomes who cannot qualify for EI. It would be federally run and financed out of general revenues. To find out more about this intriguing proposal, I urge you to have a look at Caledon's December 2011 report named Fixing the Hole in EI, Temporary Income Assistance for the Unemployed. Now, seniors' benefits. One of the few bright spots in Canada's poverty record is the remarkable decline over the years in the poverty rate for seniors. This improvement is often attributed to the federal guaranteed income supplement for low-income seniors. That's true, but in fact, other programs and factors have also contributed to the downward trend in poverty, including old age security, the Canada and Quebec pension plans, provincial and territorial senior supplements, and the revolutionary rise in women's labor force participation rate, which makes them eligible for pensions in their own right. But a closer look at the poverty statistics reveals that single seniors fare much worse than elderly living in couples. The poverty rate for single elderly women in 2010 was a still substantial 15.6% for single elderly women and 11.5% for single elderly men, as opposed to just 3.2% for seniors who live in couples. Now, Caledon has put forward several proposals for strengthening income security programs for elderly and retired Canadians, including the Guaranteed Income Supplement and Old Age Security and the Canada Pension Plan. So let's turn first briefly to the Guaranteed Income Supplement. In 2005, the current federal government announced a modest but historic raise for the Guaranteed Income Supplement for low-income seniors. This was the first real increase since 1984. Over 2006 and 2007, maximum payments rose by $432 for singles and $696 for couples. The government followed up in 2011 with another increase to the Guaranteed Income Supplement. In July 2011, it raised the maximum GIS so that it resulted in a $600 annual maximum increase for poor single seniors and a maximum $840 increase for poor couples. But note that Ottawa substantially boosted GIS payments for poor couples as well as singles. This means that most poor single seniors who receive the maximum GIS will still remain thousands of dollars below the poverty line, even with the recent increase. while all couples with maximum GIS payments will remain substantially above the poverty line. So our proposal instead is that the GIS for single seniors should be increased by $1,000, which would bring the maximum OAS GIS amount to $1,639 this year. That would cost an estimated $980 million, which is very close to the $920 million cost of the pension income splitting boondoggles for rich seniors, which should be scrapped. Boosting the GIS for single seniors by $1,000 is not enough to slash their poverty rate or fully close the poverty gap. Further, incremental increases to the guaranteed income supplement for senior citizens are required over the years. Old age security and GIS together. Pension politics heated up in the 2012 budget with the federal government's plan to gradually increase the age of eligibility for the old age security program. That means OAS and GIS, from 65 to 67 years, phased in over many years. Anyone aged 54 or over as of March 31st, 2012 will be exempt from the scheme, like a lot of you. The age of eligibility will rise gradually over 6 years, starting April 2023, and will reach 67 by January 2029. Lifting the age of eligibility for the old age security program is a dumb policy. It's regressive and it's an unnecessary move that will hit lower income seniors hardest. For it's they that most rely on old age security for their income and will suffer most as the program is de facto cut by reducing the number of years that seniors will receive benefits. Keep in mind also that poor seniors have a shorter lifespan than other seniors. Low-income seniors, including those who are afflicted with disabilities, who are on welfare or in the low-wage workforce, will have to wait 2 more years to move up to the better benefits they get from OAS and GIS. Now, we have a practical fix for this program. The federal government should create an income-tested patch to tide poor seniors over the 65 and 66 year period when they no longer would receive OAS under the new scheme. The current allowance, which is a small benefit that's part of the old age security program, could be adapted for this purpose. A more far-reaching structural reform would be to recombine old age security, the guaranteed income supplement, the age credit, and the pension income credit into a single income-tested program based on family income with a progressive design. A decade ago, the Caledon Institute, which had proposed such an integrated benefit in the Globe and Mail, worked with the federal government on this reform, which was christened the Seniors Benefit. However, and this is a long story, I can't get into it now, Ottawa withdrew its proposal in the face of opposition from women's groups and RRSP sellers from Bay Street. This option remains the most sensible design for elderly benefits. I think that if the federal government had gone ahead with the seniors benefit, we probably would not be having this debate now, since the seniors benefit would have already slowed spending on elderly benefits and not on the backs of the poor. The debate over raising the age of eligibility for old age security has drawn attention away from a much more important issue, and that's the need to expand the Canada and Quebec pension plans to boost their contribution to the earnings replacement goal of the retirement income system. There are 2 key problems: the overly modest design of the Canada Pension Plan and declining coverage of employer-sponsored pension plans and RRSPs. When the Canada and Quebec pension plans were created in the 1960s, they were deliberately designed to pay relatively modest benefits. The thinking of the day was that the maximum retirement amount would be only 1/4 of average earnings, for a maximum payment in 2012 terms of just $11,840. Private pension and savings were supposed to provide most of the retirement income for middle and upper income pensioners. But today, fewer than 1 in 4 private sector employees has a pension plan, compared to nearly 9 in 10 within the public sector. Coverage of RSPs is also weak. Only about a quarter of tax filers contribute to an RSP. Now, periodic debates on the pension system over the many years, and I think I've been through 3 or 4, have led us to modest increases in the guaranteed income supplement and the creation of a new private pension scheme called Pooled Registered Pension Plans, or PRPPs, as if we need another acronym. But Canada already has in place a voluntary supplementary system of pensions in the form of Registered Retirement Savings Plans, or RSPs. These vehicles are used mainly by taxpayers in upper income levels who have the money at hand and enjoy a hefty federal and provincial income tax break in return. This means that the earnings replacement needs of many modest and middle income Canadians will remain unresolved. It's time to expand the Canada Pension Plan. The Canada Pension Plan is one of the nation's most important social programs and stands as an exemplary model in the world of a solid and secure earnings finance pension plan. Caledon proposes that the earnings replacement rate rise by 1.5 times from its current 25% to 37.5% of the yearly maximum pensionable earnings. The YMPE also would increase by 1.5 times from its current $50,100 to $75,150. These changes would be of particular assistance to middle-income earners, especially those who work in the private sector and are unlikely to enjoy coverage of employment-provided pension plans. As a result of these two changes, the maximum CPP retirement income this year would more than double, from $11,840 to $28,181. Now, Caledon is exploring the increased contributions required to finance such a large expansion of the CPP. Finally, and I'll finish on this, the program that doesn't exist. Some people argue in favor of a start-from-scratch approach to tackling poverty and inequality. They would scrap much or all of the existing array of income security programs and replace them with a single guaranteed annual income, better known as the GAI, that would raise all poor Canadians up to the poverty line. The problem with simple solutions such as this is that they are simplistic and would not necessarily do much to get at the root causes and dynamics of poverty and inequality. In the words of the American satirist H.L. Mencken, for every complex human problem, there's a neat, simple solution. It's just that it's wrong. Poverty is a complex and multidimensional problem that cannot be vanquished with a single silver bullet. Poverty reduction and prevention require a variety of strong income programs, both income tested and social insurance, and a range of effective services. Most of the proponents of a GAI would see it delivered as a negative income tax, using the income tax system to deliver cash to the poor. But as I'm sure you know, Canada already makes extensive use of the negative income tax concept in the design of a number of income-tested programs for various groups, including the Guaranteed Income Supplement, the Canada Child Tax Benefit, the Working Income Tax Benefit, the GST credit, and provincial and territorial refundable tax credits. If we were to abolish these important measures and replace them with the guaranteed income, we likely would end up having to reinvent the current system in order to meet the needs of specific groups in Canadian society. There also would be formidable obstacles to a big bang GAI that replaced everything with one thing. These barriers include cost, political and bureaucratic inertia, concern about work disincentives and dependence, fear of the unknown, and public objection to giving people something for nothing. For die-hard guaranteed incomers, there is an alternative to the profound demolition of the whole income security system. to borrow Michael Wolfson's wonderful term. Ottawa could boost the existing GST credit to create a supplementary guaranteed income that left the rest of the income security system intact, sort of a stealth GAI. At Caledon, we view income testing as a proven technology, call it a GAI technology or DNA, to help build a fair and efficient income security system, delivering benefits in a transparent, non-bureaucratic, and non-stigmatizing manner. The foundations for income security are in place. They do not have to be built, but rather built upon. Thank you.
Well, thanks a lot, Ken, for that tour de force overview. And congratulations to Caledon on the 20th anniversary. I guess I first met Ken back in the mid-1980s. I was then working in NDP research for Ed Broadbent, and I recall I think it was on Wednesdays. There were these brown bag lunches in a big meeting room at the Canadian Council on Social Development at the foot of Parkdale Avenue. And I remember sort of Ken there sort of determinedly and driving everybody completely insane by kind of insisting on there should be some empirical legitimacy towards what people were saying. And I sort of remember, all these anti-poverty activists would sort of rail against all these programs having zero impact. And, Ken was always there sort of saying, well, actually we undermine our case if we're, constantly sort of trying to demonstrate that these policies have no impact at all. So, I've really appreciated the work of Ken ever since then. I think this empirically grounded, policy-relevant research has been enormously important. I guess I can't help but think, looking back to those days, how shrunken the world of social policy is. I mean, there used to be 20, 25 organizations represented around that table, probably 14 or 15 of which have disappeared or are virtually defunct. And I think the fact that Caledon has survived 20 years is certainly testament to his support for the work of Caledon, which has been really important in this sort of shrinking social policy environment, but also testimony to the worth of what's done. I could comment on what Ken said. I basically agree with 90% of what he said. It would be a bit invidious to concentrate on the few things he said that I didn't agree with, and I hadn't, because I'm replacing Andrew Coyne, I hadn't had the opportunity to see his remarks. So I decided just to put forward a few remarks, really building on the paper on inequality that was released by the Broadbent Institute yesterday, Towards a More Equal Canada, which I commend to your attention. So the object of my criticism here is really Andrew Coyne rather than Ken Battle. So I guess if he didn't show, that's his fate. And I guess what I want to talk about is just fairly briefly is why inequality matters, in the sense of why does the income gap, the opportunity gap between the middle class and the top of the income distribution matter, as opposed to, or in addition to, the poverty issue, which I think is crucially important as well. But inequality has a different dimension than poverty per se. And I think there you have to begin on grounds of normative theory. Why does inequality matter? And I think there's really been a serious regression from the post-war golden age of capitalism, where there was a focus on social and economic rights, embedded liberalism, social democracy, but certainly the notion of positive rights as part of a democratic society. And we've really seen a reversion, I think, in many ways to the dominant idea of public policy being classical liberalism, now dubbed neoliberalism. And I'm sort of reminded, Amartya Sen, sort of an interesting piece called Equality of What, basically argued that every normative theory that stands the ground has to believe in equality of something as a point of departure. And in fact, liberals do believe in equality of something as a departure point, which is the equality of individuals, the freedom of individuals to participate in the market. And they argue that that freedom, that equality generates the most efficient economy, the most wealthy economy. They will argue that by and large returns from the market reflect in a fair way the productive contributions of individuals. And they would further add to that, and even Hayek says this, that society does have some obligation to those at the bottom to use that increased wealth to ameliorate conditions of those at the bottom. But I think that is very much the dominant frame for policy making that social policy, by and large, has to fit its way into. I really just want to make sort of 5 quick points in response to that. Firstly, I want to argue individual market outcomes can't be equated to productive contributions. I want to argue individuals do not come to the market as individuals or as equals. I want to argue that inequality undermines public and common purposes, including, crucially, dealing with poverty. And fourthly, that inequality undermines the life chances of the middle class and economic efficiency. So the first argument, this is basically to argue individual market outcomes are equal to productive contributions. Actually, I mean, if you think about this for a moment, it is sort of fairly questionable whether Stephen Harper's sort of contribution to the net social product, net national product of Canada is equated to his income. How much any income of any individual equates to any individual marginal contribution is a moot point. But I think one really important point is if you look at the wage structures and the market income distribution of different countries, actually differ quite profoundly in important ways. So the distance between the income of a production worker in Sweden or a grocery store worker or a hotel worker vis-a-vis the middle income worker vis-a-vis somebody at the top is quite different from Canada and the US without having any apparent impact on the overall levels of productivity and growth. So you can have a much more compressed distribution of market income without any apparent trade-off for productivity. To flag a couple of key points, and that these are really documented quite thoroughly, I think, by Stiglitz in his latest book on inequality and the rise of the top 1%. A huge part of the incomes of the top 1% have been based on, they've been earned in the financial sector of the economy at the very senior upper management end, benefiting from stock options. It's rather difficult to argue that CEO pay fairly reflects the productive contribution of CEOs versus everybody else. Again, just given the vast differences in that metric between countries and given this pretty demonstrably low relationship between senior management pay and the performance of individual companies. So it's pretty difficult to kind of reduce market outcomes to some sort of fairness basis. The second point is about individuals not coming to the market as equals. And classical liberalism has forgot what classical liberalism once understood. John Stuart Mill argued very cogently that individuals did not come to the market as equals because there is accumulated ownership of wealth and the wealth that it takes to create wealth in our society. And there are huge bequests of wealth passed between generations. So if you look at the list of Canada's wealthiest Canadians in Forbes magazine, I mean, we'll see the Bronfmans, etc., huge accumulations of wealth, which cannot be in any sense rationally attributed to individual effort. The other important point, and that, this has really been very well argued by Korak in particular, is that most people, I think most Canadians would assent that when we think about equality, what we're essentially, the core of what we're talking about is equality of opportunity and life chances, that everybody in some sense should have an equal start in life and equal ability to get ahead. Programs like the child tax credit, very much the sort of foundation of that. What Korak points out, and others, is that the chances of a child ending up in the social economic structure are very closely related to the income and educational circumstances of their parents. And that relationship is by far the strongest in the most unequal countries, like the United States. And the connection between the life chances of children and their social circumstances is weakest in social democratic countries like Sweden, which I think is a really novel insight, because in a very brute way, we look at extreme inequality in the US, and it's often argued, well, that's just the price we pay for a winner-take-all society where there's real equality of opportunity. In fact, that extreme inequality is because there's less equality of opportunity in more equal societies. my third point is around inequality undermining common purposes. And I think here there's, a really good example in terms of looking at the contemporary United States. I think where it's captured most easily is in that classic liberal argument, we have an economy, it creates wealth, and then we can take that product of wealth and use it to assist those who fell behind and use it for poverty alleviation, relieving conditions at the bottom. But in fact, when you look across countries, it's the countries that have the most extreme market inequality actually end up spending much less in terms of redistributive effort. So again, Sweden, Germany, the Netherlands, where market incomes are relatively equal, actually invest the most in the life chances of, for example, poor kids, as opposed to the United States. And really, extreme inequality is less likely to look for any concern at the bottom than I think a secession of the affluent from the common purposes of society. And I think very much captured in the United States, where the wealthy prefer tax cuts because they really don't want to pay for programs that benefit other people for services that they themselves can quite easily get on the market, whether it be private education and health. So I think inequality in itself undermines any attempts to sort of equalize, and simply doesn't support selective attempts to equalize. My fourth point, and I'm trying to progress quite quickly here, it really comes out of the work of Wilkinson and Pickett and the social determinants of health literature. And there really is kind of quite interesting and compelling evidence that the middle class actually does better in more equal societies, in that a middle-class Swede or middle-class German is more likely to have children with high literacy levels than is the case in the United States. Life expectancy for people in the middle of the income distribution is higher in more equal countries than less equal countries. So there's something about the pathology of inequality that actually fall on people in the middle and not just those at the bottom. And the fifth and final point I would make is that far from fostering economic performance, I think there's increasing recognition that high inequality actually undermines the economic performance of market economies. So this has certainly been argued strongly of late by Krugman, I think particularly by Stiglitz, again in his new book. There's actually been a series of quite interesting papers put out by the research department of the International Monetary Fund, of all places, looking at the relationship between growing income inequality, extreme income inequality, and economic performance. I think the essence of that linkage is that gradually from the early 1980s, we've lost the linkage that used to exist between increases in productivity, a sort of total efficiency as an economy, and the wage growth of the middle class, people the middle class and below. And that linkage that used to exist between general economic progress and the economic advancement of individuals, the great majority of individuals, is broken down. And and a huge consequence of that has been that going back to at least 2000, in the most unequal countries, the US, the UK, and Canada is certainly part of that, our economy has become more and more driven by, not by the income growth of the middle class, but by the middle class going deeper and deeper into debt. And that has become, and combined with a housing bubble, and two being sort of closely related. And that borrowing in large part fueled by the fact that rising corporate profits, the rising incomes of the wealth have had to be recycled, not into investment, but into different forms of lending. So that's a complex linkage to talk about, but I think the key insight, and Stiglitz, in particular argues this strongly, that until we get to a fairer distribution of income and a fairer distribution of the fruits of a market economy, we're going to suffer from increasing economic instability, and we're going to face a very, very tough time of getting out of the economic circumstances that we're in. So I guess my key point here, and this is, to repeat, directed at Andrew Coyne to do my Clint Eastwood imitation. But inequality in the sense of growing differences between the very top and the middle are enormously problematic, and of course for at least as much concern over the very legitimate concern we have about poverty and alleviating poverty. And certainly, I think the work of Caledon has spoken to sort of both issues consistently. I'm very glad, I would underscore just to add one point in Ken's remarks that his work and those of his colleagues has always looked at social policy other than in terms of pure economic redistribution. I mean, there is a classic case for social policies providing a source of income security for everybody. So certainly old age security, CPP expansion, unemployment insurance isn't just about redistributive purposes. It's about economic security for the middle class. So I will just leave it there in the interest of promoting some discussion. Thank you.